Right, Mark, what is tip number 3?
Okay, this next one's a little bit bigger. So when you're giving feedback, don't give negative managerial feedback. Now, I'm going to have to explain that term. It's a term that I first came across in the work of Carolyn Morgan. 2001, this study came out. And she defines negative managerial feedback as feedback that is obsessed with task completion, presentation, those kind of study habits, rather than necessarily the work itself. And the reason I became really interested in it is that she found in her research that boys are far more likely to get that kind of feedback, whereas girls are far more likely to get feedback that improves them as learners. So the kind of thing that you often see with written feedback, you should have finished this, why aren't all the boxes filled in? I expect more detail for this, this is too scruffy, you need to use pencil instead of pen, those kinds of things. I've even seen, is this it? Written on books, and my answer to that is, well, clearly, obviously it is it, because they'd have done more if it wasn't. But those kinds of things. Now, I'm not saying that presentation's not important, and I'm not saying that productivity is not important, but when we obsess with how much boxes have been filled in, rather than looking at the actual quality of the work and what they've done that could be improved, and getting down to the nitty-gritty of the success criteria, when we do that, we're sending out these messages that say, we care more about whether boxes are filled in rather than you thinking hard. And I know that Mary Myatt speaks and writes about this really eloquently, as you would expect. And it's something that I see frequently that teachers are doing. And when teachers say, well, yeah, I want to control their presentation, I don't want it to be sloppy and so on, I say, well, you can have those kind of conversations, but don't make that the main feature of your feedback. Don't make it the only thing that you pick out on. If you've bothered to sit down and mark their books, or you've bothered to give them verbal feedback, and all you're talking about is those kinds of things, you're creating this really negative relationship, whilst at the same time you're not really helping them know what they need to do to get better. And this research shows that it leads, with students who get this kind of feedback, it leads to them enjoying activities less, they lose confidence in their own ability, and they do also start to dislike the teacher. So there's various reasons why you shouldn't do it, but I think it's something that teachers often fall into the trap of doing this. You know, they're frustrated, they've marked 17 books and they keep on seeing this same kind of trend. They're frustrated and they kind of take it out on the ink, and that's something that I think we need to really reconsider.
Well, this is a good one. You've got me thinking again here, Mark. I love this. So the first thing that springs to mind, I don't think I've done one of these interviews yet where I haven't referenced Dylan William. I always like when he says about feedback that it should improve the learner, not the work, not the specific task. And this feels kind of right up the street of that. Second thing to say is, I've been guilty of all these, Mark. Because it's so easy to give that kind of feedback, isn't it? Because it's very visual, isn't it? Like if you see a scruffy piece of work, it's the first thing you notice is that it's scruffy. Or if you've given some rule, like you've always got to underline whatever, it's so easy to spot that hasn't been done. So I've definitely been guilty of all this. I find it fascinating that the research suggests that it's given to boys more than girls. It's one of those things, it now doesn't surprise me that you've said it, because I'm thinking that's exactly what I'm doing when I'm giving feedback to boys. So this is terrible. So my big question for you is, and it's a bit of an unfair question, but I've got to ask it. So if you've got someone in your class who is really, their work is really scruffy, it's really poorly presented, and the thing is, we know that their work, like there's some good stuff in their work, but we also know that if they produce that kind of work in an exam, they're going to do well to get a lot of the marks, because the examiner's not going to take the time to read it perhaps that we would do, and so on and so forth. How do we help that child improve their presentation? Because my go-to would be to write those kind of things on their work, but now I realise that's not a good idea.
So let's say a student's work is genuinely illegible. That is a massive issue, and we can't leave that. We have to do something about that. So I'm not necessarily talking about students who you just can't understand it. That's a real problem, and that has to be tackled. But we're talking, scruffy is different to illegible. And if it's something that it's indicative of a kind of poor attitude towards their work and not really paying attention and so on, rather than just the fact that they've not got particularly neat habits. You know, my exercise books were never particularly neat. My handwriting's pretty ropey. But if it is something where you think this is an issue, what I'll do is, when I'm giving my feedback to them, and usually I do this verbally, I'm not a big fan of marking, I'll talk to them about their work, I'll talk to them about things that I want them to improve on, real areas that they can develop, and then often, a bit later, usually on the way out, I'll have a quick word with them. I'll just say, you know, one other thing I want you to think about is just to, you know, look at the state of your book and just show to me that you really care about it, and just smarten up a bit with your efforts. And I think that because I've spent a lot of time giving them that helpful feedback, they're far more likely to take it on board.
Absolutely. Final one just on this, Mark. Now, if anybody was sad enough to listen to these and do a drinking game at the same time, mini whiteboards would be a good thing to have a shot to, because it comes up every single conversation. I'm thinking here that I visit quite a lot of high-performing schools that aren't particularly bothered about students' exercise books. And I'm talking from a maths perspective here, because they realise that the way to get good at maths is just to do maths. And if you're spending 10 minutes trying to set a question out really neatly versus 10 minutes answering 5 questions, as long as they're legible, as you say, you're better off doing the latter. I just wonder whether mini whiteboards, another potential benefit of them here is for those students who are a bit scruffy. One, it encourages them to write a little bit bigger. 2, you don't have that permanence that is like scruffy work in their book that's always there. You know, it doesn't matter if you're scruffy in the mini whiteboard. Hold it up and now we can rub it off. Well, what's your view on that? Yeah,
I think that makes sense, and I think that the question you're asking there is kind of what are our exercise books for?
Yeah.
If they're there, that it's just there to allow you to do lots of practice, and to write down the answers to your retrieval practice and things like that, that's fine. But I suppose that we're hopeful that they're going to be really useful when it comes to revision as well, when it comes to them using them for study skills. And I suppose this is where the presentation side of it comes into it, and people think, okay, well, if they take really effective, neat notes, they're far more likely to use them. I think that there's a bit of both, isn't there? I think that you, on the one hand, you don't want them to obsess about everything being neat and underlined carefully and spending hours on that. But on the other hand, you would like to think that there are certain parts, at the very least, where they're using Cornell notes and so on, and that they're going to be really effective bases for their study. So I think a bit of both, to be honest. But there's certainly no reason why you can't make greater use of the mini whiteboards as a way to get away from this obsession.
Just one bonus question on this, Mark. I love speaking to non-mathematicians about this. So my theory, or my view on maths exercise books, is that kids never ever use them for revision. Like, once they've been used in the lesson, forget it, because it's so hard for 2 reasons. One, it's so hard to find what, you know, in your exercise book, what you want to revise. It's often kind of scattered all over the place. But 2, that it's very hard to, well, it's quite a poor technique to revise maths simply by rereading, you know, your notes or whatever. You want to really be doing it, and it's quite hard to quiz yourself using an exercise book. How does it work in English? Like, do kids genuinely use their exercise books and classwork to revise in an effective way?
I think certain parts they do. So say, for example, we watch a documentary that enables you to have context into the background of one of the novels that you're studying, and you get them to take notes using the Cornell Notes format, and that's something that then can be put onto flashcards and they can use them as part of their revision. One other thing that I strongly encourage my students to do is if we write practice paragraphs in lessons and they do a really good practice paragraph, or maybe they write down my model paragraph or something like that, I then ask them to try to memorise chunks of that to use in the exam. So they might use bits of it that are going to go onto flashcards, or that they might use them to incorporate them into new practice essays. So I think there is a little bit more of a sense that they are useful springboards for revision.
Got it. Fantastic.